Welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Ogborn from Warwick Township, PD in Pennsylvania. He has over 26 years experience in law enforcement. Welcome to the show, Chief Ogborn.
Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. I was going through your bio. Obviously, I know you've been in this profession for a long time. I'm really interested to get to know a little bit more about you. What was your upbringing like? What was your life like before law enforcement? And then how did you get here, 26 years ago?
That's very interesting. So, actually, for me, I grew up in a family of public servants. My mother was a teacher. My father was a firefighter. He was a volunteer fire chief as I was a child. So, I spent many, many hours at the firehouse when I was a little kid. And actually, that's what really first drew me into public service was the firefighting. Uh, Being a firefighter, you have a lot of interaction with police officers. And back when I grew up, there was a lot of TV shows that were positively showing what police officers did. So I really fell in love with law enforcement and figured I would do that at some point. However, my career took me into firefighting first. I don't know if we ever spoke about
We
that, but
didn't, no.
uh, yeah, so I've been a lifelong public servant. I was a firefighter, emergency medical technician for many years prior to becoming a police officer. And you're correct, I spent the last 26 years as a police officer.
Okay, so we have to settle the lifelong debate. Firefighters, police officers, which one's better?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm partial to police work, so I'm going to say policing. However, there's a lot that I miss from being a firefighter. Everybody loves firefighters, so I do miss that.
Yeah. It's so funny. When I first stepped into this world, I started working with law enforcement. So that was the world that I knew. And I didn't really have a lot of experience working in the fire space. And I remember going to a first responder wellness conference. So it was everybody, everyone was in the same room. And I was hearing the jokes back and forth. And I at first thought everyone was serious. I was like, oh my gosh, like they all hate each other. Like, what is going on? And then I realized that it was a total razz and that everyone actually really respects and loves each other and, supports each other. But it's kind of that funny thing of like, who's better and that kind of friendly competition, which I thought was really funny.
That is, and I've been benefit. It's been a benefit that I've got to play in both of those spaces, as you say. So
Sure. Well, and I think
I'm
it's
fortunate.
important. I think it's important for us to have different perspectives in life, and the more positions you can put yourself in, whether that's within one organization or, different life skills that you develop throughout your life, being able to see things from a different lens and have experience in different areas, I think makes you more well-rounded and makes you, a better leader in the future.
I do have a funny story. When I
Okay.
first started as a police officer, I would drive down the street and I would wave to people mowing their lawns and they would turn their back on me. And I thought, oh, that's strange. I'm just so used to everybody, their kids running out when they see a fire truck and everybody excited to see you. But as a police officer, they didn't have the same reaction. It
Mm.
took me some time to really understand why. And I had always said, as a young police officer, that I wanted to make that change. I wanted to be more approachable, and hence why I got so involved in leadership and my graduate degree is on organizational leadership. So it was very important to me to see things from a different perspective.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that because you said when you were younger, there were shows and, public perception of law enforcement was really positive. And you enter into the role and you're like, well, maybe people see me in a different way. And, of course, I think today things have changed a little bit too. And so, how do you think we can change that where, people do look at law enforcement and it is something that they strive to be and to, want to enter into this workforce and it's something that has a positive perception attached to it?
Well, I think obviously a lot has to do with training the officers. The other thing that's really important is we, as police officers and police leaders, have to do a better job of communicating and being transparent. What we've seen over the last several years could, I guess, could be attributed to people not really understanding, one, the law, what police officers are allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, and also just a general feeling, giving the community the feeling that we are approachable. In my community, as an example, I make it a point to invite people into my office. Now, I've only been a police chief for the last 4 months. However, I've been in an administrative role for the last 5 years. So it was very important to me to be a different type of chief when I actually took over this role. I want people to feel they can approach me, and the officers that work in my organization is very important.
Yeah. You said you've been in leadership a long time. What is maybe the best leadership advice that you ever received that helped you along the way?
Well, I think, I don't know if it was advice as much as it was something that I learned about myself, and that was, that continual learning is so important. Um, and for me personally, emotional intelligence was something that I had to work on and I had to build throughout my life as a public servant.
Mm.
I needed to understand more about my emotions, the emotions of my fellow officers, and also understand when people are having a bad day, how how their emotional intelligence comes into play as well. How they see things and understand, how they're seeing things from their perspective is not all the time. It doesn't all the time apply to how we're seeing it.
Yeah.
So being more patient and understanding.
Yeah, and that takes time. At least for me, it took time for me to understand those things. And I've had this conversation with other chiefs too, and I think it's kind of a mixed bag. So I'm interested to hear your opinion on this. But some people are of the opinion that emotional intelligence cannot be taught, that it's something that you have to learn through life experience and maybe something that's innately in you. And then some people think it can absolutely be taught. What do you think?
Well, I I think it can be taught. However, you have to be accepting to be taught. So,
Mm.
I can speak about many people that have zero emotional intelligence, uh, and they're not willing to accept that maybe there's something they could do differently. And these are people with advanced degrees that just don't want to hear, anything outside of their opinions per se.
Sure. Yeah, I think when you said being a lifelong learner, I smiled a little bit because I think that that is one of the biggest strengths that someone can have, to be able to continue to develop yourself, to have an open mind, to be willing to learn. It takes a lot of courage. I think that change is something that is scary for people. And when you say life learner, that means you're always evolving, you're developing, you're growing, and that means that you're changing, right? You're not going to be the same as you were before you learned that thing, and the hope is that, at least for me, that I'm always changing, and hopefully for the good. There's ups and downs, but hopefully always changing for the better. But I think that people are afraid sometimes of change. And I think that's where those walls of resistance start to come up of like, oh, like I don't want to step out into that uncomfortability because it can be scary.
And in this profession, that happens a lot. And we preach it, that change is necessary. However, most police officers have a tendency to be afraid of change because they're so used to being by the book and just following the rules. To me, that's frustrating. It's frustrating when you're not able to I don't want to say convince, but you're not able to push people outside their comfort zone to see that there's maybe a different way. And I can look back at many things that have happened in my career, and I can see how uh, the lack of change affected us negatively. And I can take the blame for some of that stuff as well, where I wasn't willing to change until I recognized that maybe I needed to look inward.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes too, and it's interesting because I just had a conversation about this earlier. I think that sometimes we have limited belief systems. And the conversation I was having earlier was this conversation of buy-in, right? We have this conversation all the time. Like, how do we get people to do the thing? And the conversation was like, well, we don't think our people are going to do anything. They're not going to do these things. And the conversation that we were having back and forth was, well, does anyone raise their hand to do the thing the initial time? Like if you walk into a briefing room and you're like, hey, like how many of you guys want to eat better today? You probably aren't going to get anyone to raise their hand for really anything. I think that the initial knee jerk reaction is always no, because again, it's maybe fear of change or a little bit of, resistance to things. And so that's where everything stops. It's like, oh, well, no one's going to do it. So we're not going to move things forward, or we're not going to try. But I think the idea is, yeah, maybe people are afraid to change. Maybe people are resistant, or maybe people don't want to take care of themselves, or whatever that looks like. But how do we put in place training or resources that encourage them to do it anyway? How do we get things to move forward, even if the initial knee jerk reaction is no? How do we like chip at it and keep moving forward and not just give up and say, well, no one's going to do it, no one's going to change, no one's going to listen? It's like, yeah, maybe that's how it is now, but how do we make a positive change for the future?
And I think being a transformational leader, and I believe that I am, at least that's what when I do all the studies and I look and I read all the literature, I feel that, to me, inspiring, motivating, empowering people to take on their passion, although it may not be mine. And I can tell you in my organization, we're a small organization, 20 officers. I have officers that come to me now and say, what about this? And I'll say, that's fantastic. Listen, do me a favor. I want you to do the research. I want you to put it together. I want you to put a proposal together. And it's amazing what's happening now. Now, granted, I've only been in this position for 4 months where I'm the actual chief, but I'm getting a lot of great feedback from officers they feel empowered, and to talk about health and wellness. Our organization has a fitness room, and one of the officers proposed an opportunity to maybe to exercise on duty, and at first being the old fashioned, police administrator, oh boy, someone's going to get hurt. They're going to be out on IOD. But when we really sat down and we talked about it, we made a change, and it's been fantastic, for the officers that want to take advantage of it. But that came from, one of the patrol officers, excuse me.
Yeah, and I think it's not being afraid to try new things. And I also, it's interesting. I kind of wonder like where we got away from like this idea of, if it helps one person, it's worth it. Because then it's a domino effect. When it helps one person, people are going to see that it helps that one person, and that one person's going to be championing these things. And then it's going to help two people, and then it's going to help five people. I think that so often, sometimes we think we got to help everyone. And if everyone's not helped right now, then it's not worthwhile. And it's like, maybe one person works out in that gym consistently, and then someone sees that one person working out for a few months and decides that they want to do it too. And it goes back to what you said, inspiring change, being that one to lead by example, but not being afraid to try things because you think that, not everyone is going to do it. Maybe not everyone is going to do it. But will one person do it? And is that worthwhile? And I think that the answer used to be yes, but I think through the conversations I've had recently, it feels like we've gotten away from that a little bit. It feels like all or nothing. And it's like we have to do baby steps. So I love that you have that approach of like, how can we start somewhere? I'm sure in the beginning, people didn't feel empowered in the way that they do now to, take ownership of these things and to come with new ideas. That happened over time and over proactive efforts. And you said that your focus on building a strong, future ready organization. And I want to know what that looks like to you, because in my mind, when you say a strong, future ready organization, it takes a lot of proactive effort and a lot of change and growth to move something forward into the future. So, what does that mean to you, and what are those efforts that you guys are making?
So that actually went back about almost 6 years ago. So in my agency, in order to move up through the ranks, you had to meet certain educational expectations. And there were only a few people that met them. So I'll to be upfront, I'm a late bloomer when it comes to education. I didn't get my bachelor's degree until I was in my 40s, and then my master's degree was in right around 50, 51 years old. So I waited, a significant amount of time. And boy, do I regret that. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But, in my agency, what I recognize is we were stagnant, and we didn't have a leadership bench that we could start building on. So ultimately what was going to happen is we were going to go outside of the organization if we needed leadership. And that was frustrating to me. So what I did once I got moved into a position where I had some authority to make change is I started changing and building a succession plan, a leadership bench program where we would start to identify our key players in the organization, not just sworn, but our civilian staff. Like, how do we build, our next, executive assistant or office manager or evidence custodian, those kind of things. I wanted to make sure that we gave people the opportunity, because I felt that I was held back some by myself and the lack of drive that I had for formal education. But I knew that we could push more and we could build more. So that's really what happened about 5 years ago. Was the succession planning went into place, and the development across the board, not just leadership.
I have so many questions, and I'm trying to make sure that it's in a really good sequence. So let's talk a little bit about your succession planning. I know that you said that leadership is a skill set. So I want to talk a little bit about the nitty gritty of how you're training the future leaders. What are some of those skills that you think make a really good leader? And if you forget this last one, I'll repeat it. But how do you feel like all of this training and succession planning leads into retention and overall wellness?
Well, I'll give you an example. I'll answer your second question first.
Okay.
I'm still here. So that's retention. I had opportunities to leave and go other avenues. I told you I went crazy on education, but I went and got my real estate license. I started teaching in a master's program. So I had all these other opportunities outside of police work, and the fact that we were able to build a program that I'm a perfect example of. I had no ambitions ever in my career of being a police chief. It was not in my cards. I would have been happy being a street patrol sergeant, or I was a detective sergeant at one point. I would have loved that. Would have been fulfilled. I would have fulfilled my career if I would have just stayed in those arenas. However, just the way things progressed and my drive and the succession planning, here I am. I'm sitting here. So I'm a success story. I know that we're building other success stories outside this room. Your first question, I believe, was what are the traits of a leader that's trying to build this?
Yeah,
So
I think makes a good leader.
So, the book will say one thing, I say, being selfless. Selfless is huge to me. And I told you, I never had a dream of being the police chief. It wasn't in my cards. This isn't about me. And although, I get the white shirt. However, this was never about me. I want to make sure that my first priority is taking care of the officers and taking care of the citizens that we're sworn to protect. Having the vision, having empathy, encouraging, adaptability, and that all comes back to, emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
That's what makes a good leader in my eyes.
Yeah. It's interesting. And this is not a like rebuttal, because I agree with you that when you're leading a team, it has to be about them and their success. And I think we've all worked for people who were not that way, that they were very self-serving. It was always about, how they looked or, their own personal gains and not about, the good of the team. And so I agree with you. My question is, as someone who's selfless and taking care of everybody else, how do you also make time to take care of yourself?
So taking care
From
of
a
the
wellness perspective,
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's important. I'll be the first to say that, I'm the person that when I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, my mind starts racing. I come to work, but I have so much on the outside that I now prioritize that I didn't when I was younger. I make sure, I'll give you an example. I got into golf recently within the last few years. I golf every week. I travel with my significant other. She and I, we travel all over. My vacation time used to be, I would purchase that back, because in our contract, we had the ability to purchase vacation time back. I don't do that any longer. I make sure I take time for myself. And I want to make sure that the old days of that, you come to work, because work is a priority. That's what puts food on your family's table is true. However, I also preach that they should be taking their time. They need to have the same, the same drive outside of work that they have here to make sure that work is not the only thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that anyone who's listening, we've all been there where it's perspective. I think age and experience and time puts things in perspective for us, and sometimes losing people or wishing you could get time back, puts things in perspective for you. And I was like you too. I actually would put money on it that you're not a person that drinks a lot of caffeine, that you're just naturally someone who wakes up at 4 o'clock in the morning and just goes. When you're telling me everything, I'm like, wow, you do a lot. But we all learn, right? It's we learn what works and what doesn't. And I have done that in my career where I thought it was all or nothing. And I thought that I had to work, 15, 18-hour days every single day in order to be successful. And I always tell everyone, I'm not saying don't put 100% into what you do, because I do think that your career is important, but not at the expense of your family or your loved ones, or your own personal health and wellness. And I say it from experience because I did that. The scales were very tipped in the way of me sacrificing everything for my career. And there are times that I wish that I could have gotten back. And I do think that through conversations I've had, it sounds to me that the younger generation maybe does a better job of, having their time off and, being able to kind of disconnect from work a little bit. But, my hope is that through our shared experiences, people can learn from us. But then also understanding that it is important to work hard. It's important to put everything that you have into your career while you're there. But then can you also, be able to prioritize the things in your personal life as well?
That's extremely important. And yes, as you're speaking about your personal situation, mine was the same. My entire life was devoted to my career, and I was on a specialized unit for 18 years where, I missed a lot of time with my family because I was with that unit. And it was something that I can't take back, and I love and I cherish, and I learned a lot from being part of that team. But it definitely paid a toll on my personal life. And Yeah, ironically, my son is a police officer now, and I didn't know he wanted to be a police officer growing up. He told me when we were walking around at a college on college campuses, I said, what do you intend on going to school for? He said, well, I'm going to be a police officer like you, Dad. And I said, well, your father's a police officer. You never once asked me a question. And it was just always funny because he, I blame myself for that because maybe I wasn't there the way I should have been for him. So I've made sure that I preach to him as he got into this field a few years ago that that he needs to take more care in himself, and when he has a family, and spending more time, away from work.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think that we're starting to, I think, become more comfortable sharing things. I, at least for me, I wasn't comfortable sharing the things that I did wrong or the messy parts or the hard parts of my life. But, obviously this podcast, I think, is a testament that I think we're all starting to open up a little bit and be able to share things, and be able to talk about some of the stuff that maybe, we wish we did better and that we hope that the younger generation can learn from so that they don't make some of those same mistakes. My question for you, I know that you're a new chief and obviously you've been in leadership for a long time, but what are your goals for the future? What's next?
Personally, or
Personally, as an organization, both.
Well, as an organization, we have some work to do. Like everyone else in this field, we're struggling to identify and recruit future. And like you had said earlier, it doesn't seem to have the interest, that it did many years ago in this field. So we have to do a better job here and across the board in law enforcement of changing the way that we attract people into this business, because it's a fantastic career. It's rewarding. It's secure and safe for the most part, as far as from a financial perspective. So from a career perspective, that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to develop a program to help attract the people to our organization, while we're also trying to build our leadership bench.
Yeah.
From a personal perspective, I am starting to transition. I know I said I've only been a chief for 4 months, but I could have retired last year, and that's where I met my requirement for retirement. But I wanted to give myself an opportunity to be in this position. So now what my job is as a selfless leader is to start training the next chief. And that's what I'm starting to do, is starting to get the things in line. Again, I plan on being here for several more years. However, I want to make sure that we start the planning phase for who replaces me and who replaces the people under me that have the potential to move up.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. I think that sometimes when people get into leadership positions, they think that if other people rise to their level, it makes them less than. But it sounds to me like you're all about the betterment of the team as a whole. And I always have said, it's like a sports thing, but I always say you're only as strong as your weakest link. And as an organization, if you want to be really strong, why wouldn't you want to develop everyone? Lift everyone up, raise the bar. So I love that you're focused on building everyone up and planning for your replacement one day, even though it's not today.
Let's hope.
Well, I appreciate your time so much. My last question for you is for that younger generation who will be the future leaders. What words of wisdom would you share with them that maybe you wish you would have known when you were younger?
So when you were talking about policing, do you mean from a policing perspective or
Sure.
just in general? Okay.
Anything you want to share.
something that a chief, my very first chief, told me when I came my first year on the job and I came off probation. He said, it's hard to pin on a badge and that says serving since yesterday, and have people respect and appreciate you. However, the experience uh, comes with time, and respect comes from dedication of your actions. And that's something that stuck with me forever, that it's how important it is that even though you get this great amount of responsibility when you become a police officer, it's okay to not know. It's okay, to learn and grow, because that's when the respect is going to come. It's going to come from the dedication that you have in your actions. So that's what I would say, as a final thought, that that's what I would recommend to any officer that was looking at this field.
Yeah, I like it. When I was coming up, I had a mentor, and the expression, they're like, fake it till you make it type of thing. And he kind of like debunked this in a little bit. I think that you can always, carry yourself with confidence, or, try to present yourself in a professional way, of course. But he said the very thing that you said. It was like, don't pretend like you know all the answers, because people can sniff it out. And the quickest way to lose trust and legitimacy is if you try to like BS your way through something that you don't know. And so he was like, you're not going to know everything. There is no human being out there that knows absolutely everything about everything. And so he said, you are going to build trust and respect faster if you say, hey, I don't know, but let's find out together. Or let me go find out for you. And then taking that time to, continue to learn and grow. And then next time you get that question, you do know the answer to it. And I really took that with me. I think it's very similar to what you said. It's like, how can we understand that it's okay to not have all the answers? But if we make something up and just fake it, people are going to see right through that. And that's going to, I think, hurt us more in the long run than just saying, I don't know yet, but let's find out.
And you definitely can't do that as a leader. That once people lose trust in you're never going to get it back. So it's highly important.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what we said before, like maybe there's some fear in that. I think as you start to, rise in your position, there's fear of being wrong. There's fear of, maybe you think that people are going to think that you don't know things. And I think that that's okay too. It's okay. It's okay to say that you messed up. It's okay to say you don't know the answer. And I think people will respect you a lot more, than lying or BSing your way through it.
100% agree.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really
Thank
appreciate you
you.
coming on here and talking about leadership and all the great work you're doing with succession planning and setting up your organization for the future. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Paige. It was a great experience.
Of course.
Thank you.